आपको दिखाते हैं जहां आरबीआई गवर्नर की प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस चल रही है।
Who have been working tirelessly in RBI's fight against COVID-19. My gratitude goes out to our teams for their intellectual support, analytical work, and the logistical arrangements. A special word of praise for our team of what is now about 200 officers, staff, and service providers who are working unstinted 24/7 in isolation, away from their families in order to keep the essential RBI services available to the nation. Once again, I wish to express our admiration for the doctors, the healthcare and medical staff, police, law enforcement agencies, functionaries and personnel of the government, the private sector, banks and other financial institutions who have risen to the occasion day after day through the pandemic to ensure continuity in provision of all essential services. Our deepest gratitude to their families too. I would now like to provide an assessment of the current macroeconomic situation, both global and domestic. By all counts, the macroeconomic and financial conditions are austere. The global economy is inexorably headed into recession. The global manufacturing PMI contracted to an 11-year low in April 2020. The global services PMI recorded its steepest decline in the history of the index. Among advanced economies that have released GDP readings for Q1 of 2020, contractions were in the range of 3.4% to 14.2%. For emerging market economies, the growth rate ranged between 2.9% and minus 6.8%. EMEs face additional pressures in the form of capital outflows and asset price volatility from the bouts of turbulence afflicting financial markets. The plunge in crude prices has dried up budgetary revenues for oil exporters. On the other hand, oil importers have been denied terms of trade gains by the crushing blow to demand delivered by the pandemic. According to the UNCTAD, the value of global trade contracted by 3% in Q1. The volume of world trade can shrink by 13 to 32% in the current year as projected by the WTO. Global financial markets have calmed after a turbulent period in March and volatility has ebbed, but markets have generally been disconnected from the developments in the real economy. Relatively unsung, global policy response by central banks and governments has been unprecedented. Let me now turn to the domestic developments. Domestic economic activity has been impacted severely by the 2 months lockdown. The top 6 industrialized states in India that account for 60% of our industrial output are largely in the red and orange zones. High frequency indicators point to a collapse in demand beginning in March 2020 across both urban and rural segments. Electricity and petroleum consumption, which are indicators of day-to-day demand, have plunged into steep declines. The double whammy in terms of losses of both demand and production has in turn taken its toll on fiscal revenues. Investment demand has virtually been halted by a decline of 36% in the production of capital goods in March, which was coincident with a contraction of 27% in imports of capital goods in March and 57.5% in April. This is also evident in a fall of 91% in finished steel consumption in April and 25% shrinkage in cement production during March. The biggest blow from COVID-19 has been to private consumption, which accounts for about 60% of the domestic demand. The production of consumer durables fell by 33% in March 2020, accompanied by a 16% decline in output of non-durables. Similar indications are reflected in surveys of the fast-moving consumer space also. In the production sectors, industrial production shrank by close to 17% in March, with manufacturing activity down by 21%. The output of core industries, which constitutes about 40% of overall industrial production, contracted by 6.5%. In conformity, the manufacturing PMI for April recorded its sharpest deterioration to 27.4, spread across all sectors. The services PMI plunged to an all-time low of 5.4% in April 2020. Amidst this encircling gloom, agriculture and allied activities have, however, provided a beacon of hope on the back of an increase of 3.7% in food grain production to a new record. A ray of hope also comes from the forecast of normal southwest monsoon by the India Meteorological Department. By 10th May 2020, up to which the latest information is available, Kharif sowing was higher by 44% compared to the last year's acreage. Rabi procurement is in full flow in respect of oilseeds, pulses, wheat, benefiting the bumper harvest. These developments will support farm incomes, improve the terms of trade facing the farm sector, and strengthen food security for the country. Going forward, these would also have a salutary effect on food price pressures. The inflation outlook has become complicated by the release of partial information on the Consumer Price Index by National Statistics Organization, obscuring a comprehensive assessment of the price situation. From the incomplete data that have been made available, food inflation, which had eased in January, from its January 2020 peak for next 2 months, that is during February and March. Now suddenly they have reversed and surged to 8.6% in April as supply disruptions took their toll, immune to the ongoing demand compression. Prices of vegetables, pulses, oilseeds, milk and cereals emerged as pressure points. In the external sector, India's merchandise exports and imports suffered their worst slump in the last 30 years as COVID-19 paralyzed world production and demand. India's merchandise exports plunged by 60.3% in April, while imports contracted by 58.6%. India's foreign exchange reserves have, however, increased by 9.2 billion during 2021, that is from 1st April onwards. And so far, that is up to 15th of May, our foreign exchange forex reserves, they stand at 487 billion US dollars, which is equivalent to 1 year's imports. I now go to the outlook with regard to inflation and growth. Against this backdrop, the MPC assessed that inflation outlook is highly uncertain. The supply shock to food prices in April may show persistence over the next few months, depending upon the state of lockdown and the time taken to restore the supply chains after relaxation of the lockdown. Among the pressure points, the elevated level of pulses inflation is worrisome and warrants timely and swift supply-side interventions, including a reappraisal of the import duties. Immediate step-up of open market sales, PDS offtake by FCI to offload some part of excess stocks can also cool down cereal prices and also create room for Rabi procurement. Given the current global demand-supply balance, international crude oil prices, metals, and industrial raw materials are likely to remain soft. This would ease input costs for domestic firms. Deficient demand may hold down pressure on core inflation, although persisting supply dislocations impart uncertainty to their near-term outlook. Much will depend on the shape of the recovery after COVID-19. Accordingly, the MPC is of the view that headline inflation may remain firm in the first half of 2020, but should ease in the second half, aided also by favorable base effects. By Q3 and Q4 of the current financial year, it is expected that the headline inflation will fall below the target of 4%. Thus, the MPC's forward guidance on inflation is directional rather than in terms of levels.
तो आप आरबीआई गवर्नर को सीधा लाइव सुन रहे थे, जिन्होंने साफ तौर पे कहा कि कोरोना वायरस के प्रकोप को देखते हुए अर्थव्यवस्था पर काफी नुकसान पहुंचा है। रिजर्व बैंक के गवर्नर शक्तिकांत दास को आप सुन रहे थे सीधा, और जिन्होंने अर्थव्यवस्था के सपोर्ट में कई ऐलान भी किया है। रेपो रेट में कटौती का फैसला किया गया, जो कई मामलों में अहम माना जा रहा है।